Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and tuning in for this special recording that we're doing in honor of National Epilepsy Awareness Month in 2023, but relevant to any time we're talking about epilepsy, really. Um, we wanted to take this opportunity to have a conversation about how important it is to talk with our families and communities, and frankly, children who have epilepsy, about what epilepsy really is, because it is, as you can see from this new book, which we're going to be talking about today, it is a very complex diagnosis, but there are simple ways of having conversations about it. And I'm so thrilled that we have our guest today. We have Haley Atkinson, who is the author, Kelsey Diaz, who is the illustrator, and Kelsey Moa, who's a child life specialist, to have a little conversation about the importance of these kind of tools and how we can use this one. So briefly, maybe we'll just quickly go around and do quick intros of who we are. So we, whoever is watching will know who is communicating with them today. So Haley, let's start with you.
Sure. So my name is Haley Atkinson, and I'm located in Salem, Oregon, so the beautiful, rainy Pacific Northwest. And when I'm not doing epilepsy advocacy, I am a communication professor at a community college, and I have three kids. But my youngest, Juniper, who will be 4 in January, was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was about 6 months old.
Great. All right, Kelsey Diaz.
I am Kelsey Diaz. I have one little boy. He will be 4 in February. And he has a rare condition called Barrett's or Winter that puts him at high risk for epilepsy. We haven't seen any seizures yet, but it's pretty much an when, not if. I am a science communicator, so I work to break down complex scientific ideas and make them more accessible, typically visually, for non scientist folks.
Love it. That's great. Thank you. And we have two Kelseys today. Kelsey Moa, we're thrilled to have you with us too.
Yeah, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Moa. I'm a dual certified child life specialist and therapist. I'm based in the Illinois area. I'm a fellow parent of 2 little ones, 1 and 3. So when I'm not working with kids and families impacted by illness and grief, including epilepsy and medical complex situations, I am also parenting.
Wonderful. Amazing. Well, what an incredible group we have today to have this conversation. Haley, I'd love to start with you to tell us how this book came about, because it's really an incredible resource that fills a gap for the epilepsy community.
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned, my daughter Juniper was diagnosed with infantile spasms, so a really rare and catastrophic form of epilepsy at 6 months old, and has had various treatments, procedures, still has daily seizures. And she has 2 older brothers. And when her middle brother was in first grade, so last year, um, he wanted me to come to his class. He was starting to notice some differences between his sister and his siblings, brothers and sisters, and was really struggling. And so I worked with his teacher, and she invited me to come during last year's Epilepsy Awareness Month to talk about epilepsy and disability. So I scoured Amazon for an epilepsy book because I thought that was the easiest way to talk to first graders, and probably ordered half a dozen. There unfortunately are not that many children's books on epilepsy. And the ones I received just didn't resonate with how I talk to my kids about not only epilepsy, but just grief and sickness and the world. We do it in a very age appropriate, but honest and medically accurate way. And so I said, forget it. I'll write it myself. I love writing. And so I decided to write a book myself. And the goal again was just for my kids and the first grade class, but it has evolved into something much bigger. And I was able to get Kelsey Diaz on board, which I know she'll talk about, to illustrate it. And yeah, it's been a really well received and beautiful project that has evolved into something much bigger than my original goal was.
Well, when something fills the gap, it spreads quick and people really hold on to it. So I'm grateful that you started that process for us. Kelsey, how did you get involved, and what motivated you to be a part of this project?
So Haley, I think, had posted on social media that she was frustrated with, not finding what she was looking for, and that she was toying with the idea of writing something herself. And in the short term, wanting to do like a PowerPoint or just have something, some visuals to go with what she wanted to talk about to these first graders. I reached out to her and let her know that I am an artist and would love to help put together a resource and something that she could use. Again, just like small scale, we weren't really thinking big picture quite yet. And so we talked about what we wanted to make sure that we included, and what the key important parts for her were. And I put together some quick sketch ideas and color palettes, and like, does this look good? And it just sort of took off from there. So my background is actually in neuroscience, so it just sort of all fit together really well. That she could say, oh, I want to talk about these particular details, and I could rely on my background to say, okay, that would look exactly like this. So it's just really, really helpful to be able to put together the pieces and have a pretty complete draft copy of what would be the book in time for her to present it to the first graders. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's really it's beautiful. You did an amazing job. I think it's such accessible art, but fun. And I think it really, you guys tell the breadth, a really comprehensive story about epilepsy in a short book. I think it's really powerful. And I wonder, maybe Haley, can you tell us a little bit about like how you decided to write this, how you kind of community sourced it, and like what that looked like, and maybe some of your favorite parts or what's resonated for the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it came a lot from what when I try to give an elevator pitch to somebody about epilepsy, there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is, right? I mean, we all know this, that we think it's, and what I thought prior to my daughter's diagnosis was, oh, maybe you can't get your license, but you can take medication and you'll be fine, right? That's what people's image is of epilepsy. And are there cases like that? Absolutely. But in terms of pediatric diagnosis of epilepsy, especially, within the first year of life, we know as part of the community that usually it does not turn out that, oh, you just can't get your license and you might have to take some medication if you're diagnosed within the first couple months of infancy. And so that was really important for me to communicate. But then also I'm like, well, when I started thinking about what I wanted to include, I'm like, okay, well, I need to explain what a seizure is to children. I need to explain how you get epilepsy. So all the different reasons that you can get epilepsy, everything from genetics to a traumatic brain injury to your brain being formed differently, and explain that to kids. And then I go, well, then I need to be able to explain all the different treatments, everything from a ketogenic diet to medication to brain surgery. And then the very important part for me that I feel like was not represented prior to our book was one, that sometimes it doesn't work, that you can have refractory epilepsy. And two, even if you have seizure control, a lot of times, especially if you're diagnosed early, there are long-term implications regarding disability. And I didn't feel like that was represented or even known widely in the epilepsy community, that why can seizures make it really difficult for someone to learn to walk or talk, right? And how do I explain that? So that was kind of all the things I'm like, I want to include this, 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 and this. So I wrote an initial draft, and then what was important to me is that I got feedback, because I wanted to write something that was useful for other parents. I had a lot of parents that wanted to do something similar, of wanted to talk to their children's classes or explain to family members or siblings, especially, who felt like, well, why are my brother and sister different from other brothers and sisters? And so I probably sent out a draft to maybe a dozen families and individuals with epilepsy to say, please give me feedback. What should I change? No hurt feelings. What would you like to include? And it was really important to me to incorporate that, to be as inclusive as we could possibly be. And so, one example, and I'll show a picture of it, was there's a family that I've connected with whose son is able to walk, but he's not very stable and is always at risk of seizures and drop seizures specifically. So he wears a helmet and he gets a lot of stares. He is in middle school, and middle school can be mean. And so she said, well, could you make sure that there was an image in the book that showed a kid with a seizure or with a helmet? And so, that's what we did. We made sure that there was a kiddo with a helmet in the book. And on another page, there's a kid in a standing frame. So there showed representation. The other thing that was important is that we had actual neurologists take a look at it and give us feedback. And we have a really wonderful relationship with my daughter's neurologist. And so the one feedback he gave was, hey, can you make sure the EEG actually looks like an EEG with someone who has epilepsy? And so this is an accurate EEG. And there's a little picture. This actually is supposed to represent my daughter, Juniper, when she gets her EEG. So making it scientifically accurate. And then the other thing that we got feedback on was, can you make sure that there's different images representative of why somebody gets epilepsy or could have it? And my probably very favorite page, and I think it's Kelsey's as well, is the MRI page that shows the different types of brains. So we have a typical structure of a typically developing brain, and then we have lissencephaly. So we say some brains can be smoother, some brains can be bumpier, so PMG, or some brains can have things that look like freckles or birthmarks, so focal cortical dysplasia. And I personally don't know of any children's book that has different brain images in it. And so that has been a page that is just a favorite of mine and has been, I think, a favorite of a lot of families to say, I have a child with lissencephaly. Never in a million years would I think I would have a children's book that has an image of lissencephaly or even referenced in it. And then the last thing that a lot of families said they wanted was, could you have visual representation of some of the devices that my child uses? So we have here a feeding tube, a gate, doing it backwards, a gate trainer, and then a talker or an AAC device. And so that's been really fun as I've seen, siblings reading the book and going, oh my gosh, it's a talker like my sibling has. So seeing that representation and getting that feedback is kind of what crafted what I wanted to include. And then with Kelsey, how we represented the different characters in the book.
Yeah, I just absolutely love that it shows the breadth and diversity of what epilepsy is and can be, can look like, can impact. And I think this is a tool. So I have a son, for anyone who doesn't know, an 11-year-old son who has SCN8A, DEE, and he has a little sister, an 8-year-old sister too, who, I work from home and my job all day is talking about epilepsy. And so she picks up on all of these little things. And, I would have conversations with her to try to explain what it is. And I very much in the same way as you, it's like, we have to be medically accurate. We want to be sensitive. We want to be thoughtful. We want to be, honest. But the book gave me so many more tools to be able to show that, really. So I've really appreciated it. So Kelsey Moa, we'd love to hear from you. You're somebody who has worked with these families for many, many years who are trying to navigate epilepsy, complex disorders with families. Maybe you can start by telling us about, why it's important. If you think, I'm not going to try to say that it is, I'm going to let you make that call in your professional judgment, but, having tools to be able to explain, not just to those who have epilepsy, but those who are around them and love them and in their community, why those kind of tools are necessary, and how would you think there might be, some gaps to fill with these kind of resources?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I do agree that it is extremely important for kids and families to have tools to exactly your point, have honest, age-appropriate information about what's happening, in their environment, in their family, to their own bodies. And I think what's so great about this book is that it can be used for such a range of situations. You know, working in the hospital, when I used to work in pediatric ICU, I could see a time where this could live on a shelf and I could be referencing it to prepare a child for their EEG, or to show a sibling what their, you know, brother or sister's having done at the hospital. But then it can also be so meaningful to help with all of the ongoing conversations and challenges that happen at home after someone leaves the hospital. And I had a firsthand experience with that myself, with a family that I babysat for that had 3 young children, and their middle child had a seizure while I was caring for her, and I saw the whole experience of an ICU admission, to a general pediatric admission, to EEGs, to MRIs, to ongoing treatment, both medical and you know, other ancillary supports, and so seeing how that impacted the family in their day-to-day lives. And so I just think it's so important not only to have tools to teach kids about what's happening, but also to have ongoing references about the day-to-day, you know, challenges and life that comes with this type of diagnosis. So it's amazing. I'm someone, you know, people are coming to me saying, how do I tell my kids about this? How do I talk to my kids about this? And I'm using my knowledge and expertise to break down concepts like seizures, to explain to children at different ages, and to guide parents on how to do that. And not every parent feels comfortable or has that instinct around what to say or how to say it. And so to have a resource that they can have given to them or purchase to be able to then say, this is what I'm talking about, right? And have words on a page to read. It's just really, really useful for all types of caregivers.
You know, Kelsey, that made me think. So a lot of the books that I saw before, and again, I don't want to be criticizing all these other books. They've all served their place, and a lot of times they came from a parent that was wanting to fill a need as well. But I think a lot of them were like were created to walk a child through the process of, you know, that initial, you're going to get an EEG. This is what it is. You might get an MRI if they reference that. You might take some medication, and then it kind of stopped after that, and then everything was fine. And you know, I think what you had mentioned too is, and there's a lot of things that continue to happen afterwards. And I think that's one thing I'm really proud of about our book is, yes, it walks through the beginning thing so that either a child experiencing epilepsy understands the steps they may go through, or a sibling will understand. But then it also talks about, well, what happens afterwards, especially if things don't work. And various treatment options too, because as we know, sometimes the treatments don't work. And so that continuing the story, that it's not just this, well, you take medicine and then there's a happy bow to end things, I think is something that we wanted to touch on too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
just going to add, I think the beautiful thing about a book such as this, that's intended for younger children or different developmental levels, is to have a parent or a caregiver walking a child through the book. And so you can also modify which parts you're using and how it applies to your specific family, or use it to just educate about inclusion, right? And, oh, that's a feeding tube. Some kids, you know, eat by mouth, and some kids need help from a tube, right? Like education, inclusion, but also modifying it to match someone's lived experience. And I think because you've included so many different experiences, it allows clinicians and parents and caregivers to be able to do that with more ease. You know, and I do that a lot in my work. You know, there may be a book about a different diagnosis, and every, you know, the person in the book that has the illness is not the person in your family. We can change that. We can talk about that differently. And while I know that your lived experience is on the pediatric side, I'll add that I work a lot with kids who have a parent with illness, and this could be really useful for kids who are having a parent experiencing seizures as well.
Yeah, in fact, when I brought it in this year to my son's class, his second grade class, I was reading it and a little girl raised her hand. She goes, my dad has seizures. And I go, oh, okay. So we adjust, and I go, well, have you seen your dad? Has he had to take medication? Have you seen a seizure? And she's like, yeah, he's gone to the hospital before. Now, obviously, a lot of things don't apply, but she was able to relate to it because her dad has had seizures. She knows that. He takes medication. And now she's seeing it represented in a book.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, as the mom of a kid who's, you know, very severely impacted by his epilepsy disorder, it also just feels like there's finally some representation for what things can look like for us. And I'm already like reached out to my daughter's class to say, hey, can I come in and read this book and have that conversation? And I think, frankly, it shouldn't be only on families to come in and read this book. I think this is a book that every school should have, and they should read it to schools, to classes, so that they can see in their classmates, or they see it in their community, right? We need to be having these conversations, not when our kid in the class has a sibling that has epilepsy or a child who has epilepsy and is in class, so kids can be aware and sensitive and thoughtful. It should be a part of how we do general education and talking about the diversity of lived experiences, right? That, you know, people live different realities and have different challenges, and we should be respectful of those and thoughtful and inclusive and aware. So to me, it feels like, you know, just a great epilepsy 101 and like a resource for everyone.
You know, I do think that and I even had hesitations going into my son's classes. Well, all these kids now think they're going to have seizures and then go home to their parents and be like, I learned about epilepsy. And now their parents are emailing saying my kid is terrified they're going to have a seizure, right? Like that was my concern. And I think, you know, when I've talked to families that don't have children directly impacted, I think sometimes that is a fear, that if we are honest with kids about, you know, epilepsy or cancer or disability, that they are going to spiral, especially at a specific age when death is very scary and on their mind, and they're starting to become aware of it, that they are now going to be terrified that they are going to be impacted by that. And I did have a kid ask something about, you know, what if I have a seizure? And I said, you know, seizures, technically they're not rare, but I said, this type of epilepsy is pretty rare. Let's talk about what rare means. That doesn't mean that it's impossible, right? But the likelihood of you now having a severe seizure, technically, I guess it's 1 in 26, but and there happened to be 26, and someone was like, there's 26 kids in our class. So that means one of us. I'm like, okay, we're spiraling here. Where do we go? But it was a really good conversation. And I think that, you know, we don't get to shelter our boys from trauma and grief. We don't have that privilege because they see it every day. They've seen their sister. We've had to call 911. They've known when she's had brain surgery. And gosh, I wish we could. But at the same time, it's really changed my perspective of how I talk to my children about things that are scary for them. And I don't feel like families should shy away from books about epilepsy or cancer or disability because they're worried about how their children may take it. And in fact, you know, if you wait until a child is exposed to it, my guess is, I don't have the childhood background, but my guess is that's even more traumatic. Like, start the conversations now and be honest that disability is a normal part of life and these things are a normal part of life. And, you know, I've said to my sons when they've been scared about their sister, yeah, it is scary, but we also have a plan and we're prepared if something happens, and you don't need to worry about that. And so I think that's a fear that I think parents have when they bring topics like this into their household.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to that. I think that one thing for parents to remember is that just because we're not talking about something doesn't mean that kids aren't thinking about it. And so what we can do by that is actually give them a narrative, help them make sense of what they're seeing in their classroom or in their environment or in their community so that they know how to talk about it. They know how to understand it. We can break it down to scientific, you know, language and explain, you know, how common things are. I just shared a post around, like, when you become a parent, you think, you know, your job is to protect your kids, and then you realize you can't, and then you realize your job is to support them when hard things are happening. And so books like this help parents support their kids. And all of these books should be on all shelves because it does just create more awareness and inclusion, and doesn't wait till there's a reason to talk about something, but rather just normalizes that these are things that are happening in, you know, in the world, in our environment. And I think that can teach a lot for kids and families.
Amazing. I mean, I think that's a beautiful way to kind of wrap it up and just say, you know, this is an incredible resource. I hope that all of you will go and buy it if you're able to. If not, hopefully we'll get it in libraries soon and people can be checking it out. Encourage your healthcare providers to get this, you know, to have on the shelf. I don't know, anything anybody wants to share as we wrap up?
I think I just want to sort of tag on to what Kelsey and Haley were mentioning. Is that idea of, that this is a really excellent resource for non-medical families, for everyone, because, if you have this in your kids' at-home library, or you see it in your local library or your school, it is on its own. I'm proud that we put together a engaging and interesting book on its own, regardless of what it's about. And so that helps kids to have some background information and some background knowledge, and the adults that are reading it with them, so that, if they do come to know somebody with epilepsy, or if they see a kid with a feeding tube or a gait trainer, they can go, oh, it's like that book we read about epilepsy, and they can, be more prepared for that situation with a sense of inclusion and, kind curiosity, or a sense of connection, instead of staring and having a parent say, oh no, don't stare. They're more prepared for those situations, because they inevitably will happen, because disability is normal. And I think that was a big goal for me, was normalizing disability as just part of human experience. And as medical parents, a lot, we have to remind ourselves, or, remind others around us, like the idea of presuming competency for our kids. And I think that is true of non-medical kids also. Presume competency. Like, they can understand this stuff if it is presented in a way that is appropriate to them. So there's no reason why a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old can't look at and understand MRI brain images. And they think it's really interesting, because science is cool and your brain is really cool. And I loved making that spread. That was my favorite. Like, as a as a neuroscience geek, like, I was like, oh, this is so neat. I get to draw brains all day. And I'm so glad that page is really resonating with kids and with families, because it sparks that curiosity, and it sparks that, like, understanding, and those aha moments of, oh, like, that's what you mean when you're saying this, like, abstract big word like lissencephaly or something like that. It creates something that's more tactile, that's more concrete,
Accessible. Yeah.
and accessible, to understand those potentially scary concepts. If we just presume that the kids will understand it, and will have really great questions and really great thoughts around what it is that they're learning, I think a lot of people would be surprised that a book like this is met with a lot of excitement and curiosity versus fear or worry. So yeah,
Kelsey, you bring up an interesting point about fear. I would say, if parents or caregivers are seeing this book on a shelf and your kid asks, like, what's that book about, or what does that say? Like, read it, right? Like, don't be afraid to turn away from it. Like, oh, we don't need that one, right? Like, say, like, oh, it says, what is epilepsy? Let's learn together, right? Sit down, open it, read it, talk about it. Because I think a lot of that fear is actually more in the adults than the kids themselves. And so to see a book and have a kid be curious, a parent might not know what to do. And so my invitation to you as a parent is to read it. Sit down with your kid, read it, explain it, respond to their questions.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is, I will say that I brought it to work the other day, and these are a lot of people that have PhDs, and adults with PhDs were going, I learned about epilepsy. So it's not just a book for kids, apparently, given we're in the humanities and social sciences, but I would guess even in STEM fields, there's a lot of adults that learned. My 95-year-old grandma, who has bought 3 copies and shared it around her retirement home with pride, said she has learned a ton about epilepsy as well. And, just the last thing I want to say is, I'm not very good at self-promotion, but I guess this is what Kelsey and I are doing, is we'd love to get it in libraries, but the way that libraries acquire books is through reviews on, like, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So if you do purchase it, which is available in paperback and hard copy on Amazon, also on Barnes and Noble and some other places. If you do purchase it, we would love reviews, honest reviews, because that's how libraries across the country decide to acquire books, and schools as well, how they decide what books they're going to acquire. And I encourage you to once you're done with the book, you can either keep it or donate it to a school or a library or a medical facility, so that other people are able to access it as well.
That's great. That's a little bit of advocacy that we can all do, right? I mean, we don't all have the opportunities to do, go onto the Hill and do all big kinds of advocacy, but this is a fairly simple way to improve the understanding of epilepsy, awareness about it. So I'm so grateful. And just so others know too, that in the back, there are a listing of different resources that you can use to learn more about epilepsy. And we're grateful that you included Deep Connections, which of course is really targeted towards families who've got really complex kids and are dealing with the rare epilepsies and all the challenges that come with that. And so we encourage you to also go to the website and learn more if you're not familiar with Deep Connections, and you have a kid who's got a complex epilepsy. There's lots of resources there, and we want to keep building them out for you all. So be in touch and let us know what you want us to talk more about on there. Thank you for this amazing discussion in honor of National Epilepsy Awareness Month and this incredible new resource that is out. And what is Epilepsy, that is written by Haley Atkinson and Kelsey Diaz. And thank you so much, Kelsey Moa, for joining us for this conversation. It's been really powerful, and I'm excited for what the future holds if we can get this book in more people's hands.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.